EDM. It has many different names and has been an ever-evolving genre throughout the decades. Today, EDM has risen to extraordinary heights. Once an underground genre of music, to now topping Billboard charts and hosting large-scale music festivals entirely dedicated to the genre. But what is electronic dance music? In general, EDM can be characterized by a few defining features. Electronic refers to the inorganic sound which is found within typical EDM. Or more specifically, the sound that are produced through electronic instruments. This inorganic sound is made possible using a combination of digital and analog equipment, such as synthesizers and drum machines. As music technology evolves, so does the sound of EDM. Dance refers to the strong rhythmic percussion also found in most EDM. The rhythm is the heart of EDM, the magic that allows you to dance all night long. Put it together and we get the magical world of electronic dance music. But where did it all begin? The origins of EDM can date back as far as the early 1960s. This was a time when the funk genre truly began to set the tone for dance music. People wanted music that was fast tempo and allowed for you to truly dance to the beat. Funk music was groovy and often highlighted the percussive sound of drum and bass lines. Songs like Shout by the Isley Brothers featured these elements which people loved to dance to. Now let's fast forward to the late 1960s, to the height of one of the world's most famous bands, the Beatles. The Beatles had a major influence on the way music was produced by introducing the use of electronic instruments. Specifically, the Moog synthesizer, which was the key behind the psychedelic sound found within the popular album by the Beatles, Abbey Road. This experimentation of combining different sounds and instruments inspired other artists to start doing the same. Bands such as the Silver Apples began to use the trance-like sound of synthesizers to create electronic music specifically intended for dancing. Another important influence from the late 1960s was Jamaican dub music. Jamaican dub stems from roots reggae and sound system culture, which would become one of the most important precursors to contemporary electronic dance music. Dub music can be characterized by remixed reggae tracks, which emphasized rhythm and created ambient texture within their sound. Pioneered by studio engineers such as Lee Scratch Perry, who would deconstruct existing multi-track reggae mixes by using mixing boards to create foreground spatial effects, such as reverb and delay. This experimentation was musically cutting edge for its time, and many others began to use similar electronic instruments to create new effects. With the stage set, the 1970s was a pivotal moment for the EDM genre. Considered one of the most important decades of dance music, the 70s was the time artists truly began to experiment with new electronic sounds. New wave music was the term given for the new electronic sound, such as synth pop. Remember the Moog synthesizer? This electronic instrument particularly caught the eyes of German electronic music pioneers, Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk's 1974 album, Autobahn, utilized drum machines, sequencers, and the mini Moog synthesizer. Autobahn fully embraced the repetitive electronic sound and became known for popularizing electronic music as a standalone genre. During this time, Americans were also beginning to discover a new party scene, the disco. Disco exploded in the early 70s and created a dance movement which allowed for electronic music to evolve even further. Artists waste no time utilizing the new electronic music technology that was available to them. The 1971 hit Family Affair by Sly and the Family Stone has subtle hints of the disco sound, which incorporated an early drum machine known as the Maestro Rhythm King 2. This sound gave inspiration to later disco artists such as the Bee Gees, Donna Summer, and many others. Donna Summer went on to release the timeless disco classic I Feel Love in 1977, which featured a dominant synthesized backing track and has been suggested as the real beginning of electronic dance. The song is even sampled by popular artists today, such as Sam Smith's I Feel Love, released in 2019. The Roaring 80s. In this era, pop music was infused with electronic music, making it the mainstream appeal. It was the rise of electronic dance music. The genres we see today, like house and techno music, derived from the 80s club scene. During the 80s was when the emergence of the 808 drum machine transformed the way musicians created music. The 808 is an electric drum machine, one of the most popular drum machines to be created. It creates sound in the imitation of acoustic drumming. Some of the acoustic instruments you can hear it imitate are bass drum, snare, toms, rim shot, cowbell, hi-hat, and cymbal. You can hear 808s in nearly every track that exists today, as well as most forms of electronic dance music. Along with the 808s, the music industry was revived with the MIDI, which stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. This brought instruments, computers, and other hardware together to communicate. Also, during the 80s, hip-hop had a strong influence on the club culture. Artists were using turntables like a musical instrument. Grandmaster Flash is known as a pioneer because of his turntable masterpiece. In 1981, he shocked the world with the release of The Adventures of Grandmaster Flash on the Wheels of Steel. This record included tracks from Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, Cheek's Good Times, and Blondie's Rapture. Another subgenre that took off during the early 80s was electro. This was inspired by hip-hop and German synth-pop. This subgenre used synthesizers and drum machines, replacing the traditional instruments like the drums and a bass guitar. Afrika Bambaataa, also known as the Godfather, was a U.S. electro and hip-hop artist. He released Planet Rock in 1982. This track brought a unique sound to the dance floor. This track not only helped develop the electro style, but also paid homage to the previous decades. Today, Planet Rock is still synonymous with electric music and hip-hop. The U.S. during this time was a breeding ground, with DJs playing dance music everywhere. They were mixing the older disco, electronic pop, and electro funk to the dance floors. A lot of revolutionary inventions happened during the 1980s. In this time, the early forms of house music also hit the scene. Artists such as Chicago DJ Jesse Saunders took inspiration from funk, R&B, the European electro movement, and Hurley hip-hop when producing tracks. House music gained popularity and momentum and spread across Europe like wildfire. During the late 80s, techno was the new sound that started to gain traction in the clubs of Detroit. It was known as Detroit techno. Fun fact, techno is derived from the word technology. With the techno sound, it was the melting pot of African American styles such as electro, Chicago house, synth pop, and funk. Now in the 1990s, the rave scenes over in Germany and the UK really shaped the emergence of trance music. Trance music is a form of electronic dance music that has hypnotic melodies and swirling rhythms. Even though it is inspired by multiple music genres, from house music to classical music, trance is distinguished by its production. The aesthetics that techno music combines, such as a faster tempo, minimal, repetitive synthesizer lines, and the array of effects makes it distinguished. One of the most popular trance tracks to come from the 90s was Don't Be Afraid by Ferry Cortson, also known as Moon Men. While originating in Germany, trance music found its way to the West Indian coastline of Goa. Due to trance music's broad following, numerous subgenres were created by uplifting trance, progressive trance, and Joa trance. This genre is considered a more melodic variant of house and techno due to the repeating melodic phrases. Uplifting trance genre lends a good bit of its influence from classical music. Another popular trance track, Scorcho by Sasha and Darren Emerson. Also at this time, the UK London mostly was experimenting and influenced new genres that had been leaning towards more of a bass sound and faster tempos. The most notable genres to come from these experiments were jungle and UK garage, forming the basis of spin-off genres, drum and bass, and dubstep during the late 1990s. Over in France, EDM producers were doing their own experiments, combining samples from the 70s and 80s disco tracks while adding filter and phaser effects. This retro style of music would later become known as French house in the late 90s, being responsible for the legendary electronic music duo Daft Punk. In 1997, Daft Punk released the track that would change the world of electronic dance music around the world. This track would be known as one of the supreme EDM tracks reigning in the global music charts. It was #1 in Iceland, Canada, Italy, the UK, and the US. Drawing closer to the new millennium, EDM really gained a lot of momentum in Europe. It was quickly becoming a huge genre that would reach a much wider community. What was once a genre common at the depths of the underground started to now be out in the mainstream. However, the opposite was happening over in the US. The government in America despised the rave culture due to its association with recreational drugs like ecstasy. In 2001, Rave Act, Reducing Americans' Vulnerability to Ecstasy Act, was the final nail in the coffin on raves nationwide, forcing house and techno further underground, despite its Chicago and Detroit origins. The top DJs were producing electro tracks and seeing great success on the charts across the globe. In 1997, Basement Jaxx came out with the Raw Shit, which would be considered as one of the early examples of electro house. But it wasn't until 2002 when the genre was brought into mainstream. Thanks to an Italian DJ producer, Benny Benassi, with his track Satisfaction reaching #1 in the UK, EDM started to become mainstream. In the 2000s, the success of EDM started to rapidly rise, especially when Eric Prydz dropped his track Call On Me in 2004, reaching #1 on multiple charts across the globe. In 2006, 2 EDM tracks were occupying the UK's top 40 charts simultaneously. Put Your Hands Up for Detroit by Freddie LeGrand and Yeah Yeah by Bodrix had the #1 and 2 spots. Dance music is considered a constant fixture in our lives now. The EDM album that started to resonate with the US crowd in 2007 was from a French electronic music duo Justice called Cross. This was because the album had help of synthesizers, but was also produced with influence of rock and indie, which had a familiar format of a rock performance. The next trend that started was electronic core, which was a fusion of metalcore and electronic elements. It was trending through the US, Australia, and European markets alongside dubstep. Dubstep was introduced to the US music industry by Skrillex, a Grammy-winning EDM artist. Let's not forget that from the early David Guetta mainstream collaborations to Skrillex and deadmau5, starting a new wave of sound. Around this time, festivals were taking off in popularity both in the US and in Europe. They brought in millions of fans from all over the world. With these festivals, EDM DJs got a chance to showcase their talents to the world on a big stage. Thanks to the international DJs and music producers, at this time, the popularity started to pick up in the US because they were drawing attention to the genre. DJs and producers like Tiesto, Daft Punk, and David Guetta, who once had a cult following, finally became chart-topping mainstream artists. The nightclubs were packed and busy because they were the premier destination for people to hear the latest tunes and see the hottest DJs at the time. During this time, dubstep was really taking the world by a storm due to Skrillex taking advantage of the genre's success it was having in the UK and feeding it to the American audience. In the 2010s, Skrillex later released 2 EPs, winning Grammys for each. Skrillex also held the world record for the most Grammys won by an electric dance music artist as an 8-time Grammy Award winner. At this time, the term EDM was becoming more well-known and was being promoted through the American music industry. This was a great attempt to rebrand this genre because of all of the backlash the rave culture got. The first 2 EDM producers to really crack the American market were Martin Garrix and Hardwell. One of the most iconic groups to come from this time was the Swedish House Mafia. This supergroup consisted of 3 Swedish DJs by the name of Axwell, Steve Angelo, and Sebastian Ingrosso. They were considered the pioneers of this revolutionized genre by the turn of the decade. In 2012, they came out with Don't You Worry Child, which can be argued as one of the most popular and commercially successful tracks of the time. They collaborated internationally with Timmy Tempa and Pharrell Williams on that track, and it went #1 in Sweden, Australia, and the UK. Because of this, we saw more DJs collaborating with artists outside of the EDM community. Also, we cannot talk about the 2010s and not mention Calvin Harris. He was another vital part of the elevation of EDM, taking it to new heights. He produced the track We Found Love with Rihanna, and it went #1 on the Billboard charts, spending 8 consecutive weeks there. Now today, EDM has monopolized the dance music market. This wave of electronic dance music has now swept across all continents. This has touched people of all cultures and ethnicities. They are coming together to experience electric music more than ever. The EDM festivals are the top festivals that seem to be increasing in attendance each year. The major all-inclusive festivals like Lollapalooza and Coachella for the past few years have been catering more and more to EDM. Today, EDM can be distinguished by original sound mixes and remixes by world-famous DJs such as Steve Aoki, The Chainsmokers, Martin Garrix, David Guetta, Tiesto, Kygo, and Avicii. Also, EDM subgenres are now more than ever used by a large majority of hip-hop and pop artists like Justin Bieber, Taylor Swift, Selena Gomez, Drake, and Coldplay. Electronic dance music today, while still paying homage to its origins, has a way of still keeping it fresh for all subgenres. Thank you again for tuning into our documentary about the past, present, and future of electronic dance music.